Hi, I'm Casey Browning from Retroactive Arcade, and today I want to talk to you a little bit about a couple of truths and myths and maybe debunk a few rumors and stuff like that about the types of wood used in building arcade machines. A lot of people seem to think that plywood is the end-all be-all for whatever reason, and I just want to go over a small brief history of that, but the reason why cabinet makers and stuff choose not to use plywood and stuff like that for bigger cabinets and such nowadays. So basically in the end what happens is you've got 3 different grades or 5 or 20 different grades of actual plywood. Usually when somebody uses plywood, they use something that's called good one side. So it's rough on one side, smooth on another. It comes in different plies, it'll come in different densities, that type of a thing. So with that being said, like you can go to any Home Depot, you can go to a specialty place. We're cabinet makers, so we actually have a large supplier, so we have access to pretty much anything and everything that you could possibly get for plywood and all these other types of wood that I'm going to talk about today. This is basically a regular type of mid-grade or low-grade type of plywood. Now you wouldn't want to build an arcade out of this stuff. It's very soft, not very dense. Nails, screws, whatever aren't going to hold that well into it. This one's just kind of for some like maybe subfloor type of material when building a house and stuff. This one here is good one side, so it's nice and smooth. I don't know if you can see it on the camera, but she's nice and smooth. You can't really feel the grain, you can see it. It does have a bit of a wave into it, right? And then on this side it's rough, so you can see all that grade. So obviously that would be the inside of a cabinet. Now this is more of the grade of what somebody's going to use. If they are a quality cabinet place or somebody who believes in building something that's quality, they're going to use something more like a furniture type of birch, which is either usually good one side or good both sides. Now the reason being for that is that this stuff isn't going to have any give really to it. It's hard like granite in a sense. It's really dense, you can tell by its ply. If you're going to hit it with nails and stuff like that, the nails aren't going to go all the way through. They're not going to they're not going to countersink into the wood and possibly go through the other side, that type of thing. This is really good for cleat or like cleating the insides of stuff or bracing the inside of some type of furniture or cabinetry and that kind of a thing to keep it all square and straight, because this stuff doesn't really move that much. Now the thing with plywood, we don't use plywood in anything that we build. The reason being for that is that plywood's like an old material. People have that myth that arcade machines were always built out of plywood. They should be built out of plywood. I mean, all that comes down to personal preference, but we live in Canada, so our climate kind of goes up and down. So one day it's really warm and humid, the next day it's kind of cold and dry. Our seasons are really quick, I guess depending on where we live in Canada. Sometimes it's really slow, but either way we get a lot of humid and a lot of dry, and it happens all year round. So when that happens, these plies, especially on the lower grade plywoods and stuff like that, which was a lot of the old arcade machines, was a lower grade plywood for what we would have considered today, because it was just a generally wide used material. But basically what happens is it starts to warp. That grain on the outside where I showed you where it's not unfinished, that starts to push through on a finished side. So you'll see that in an old cabinet. You'll see the grains starting to break off or the paint starting to peel along the grains and things like that. Now those cabinets are 30 years old, so granted that wood is pretty good and it lasts forever, so you think, right? It's all good. But nowadays, our weather's changing a little bit, and that humidity and stuff like that, especially in Canada, like what I'm talking about, it expands and contracts so much that it starts to warp. So now we've got a major issue with plywood. It will warp. So now you're not getting a square machine, it's starting to bend and curve and it concaves in and things like that. Over time you don't really see it. So when that happens, it's squeezing and pulling in on the inside. So it's actually it's pulling itself apart when that actually happens. So to stay away from that, what we use nowadays is particle board, which is, this is an MDF, but it's got a particle board core. This is a little bit of a higher grade one. It's not just a bunch of wood chips all put together like it looks like. This is actually hardwood chunks left over from mills, and they put it all together in this specific stuff. But you can get stuff that's really airy that you can actually see the holes in and stuff. That stuff's not as good a quality. So there is a ton of different qualities of this melamine. So the myth and folklore of melamine or particle board being junk, It's not really true. So if you really know what you're doing and you're like work cabinet makers have been using it for years, this stuff is a pretty solid, tried and tested type of material. Now it does have its flaws. With that being said, some of the flaws are if the finish gets broken somehow, like this. Some of the nails on this test piece here basically went through the other side. This is impossible to repair properly. You can't redo the finish on these things, so it's kind of a one try or nothing. And once something like that happens, you can see where these have flaked out. This one here is just punched out a little bit. You can grab it with your finger and it just peels off and breaks. So there is a downside to this if you don't use it properly. But if you know what you're doing and you get this done by a pro, or you are meticulous and you want to do it yourself, this stuff is a really good material to work with, because once it's built, this finish, it doesn't scratch that. It doesn't scratch that easy. In transport, before it goes onto a CNC, when it's on the lift and it's moving and there's a lot of weight involved, they seem to scratch. Like you can sneeze on it, it would almost scratch. So if you take the good time and care and effort beforehand, by the time it comes off of here and you put it into a cabinet, this almost feels like it's indestructible, even though people claim that it's a cheaper wood. Now, it's just because of that kind of inside kind of wood chip feel that people think that. Now, a lot of cabinets, kits, like arcade kits and stuff like that, a lot of people use cam locks and stuff, and what those are is a pin that goes in, and then there's a cam lock on the other side that goes in, and you twist it and it just locks in. It's just like IKEA when you're building a bookshelf, that type of thing. That's the same type of material that this is made out of. We personally use a really high-end version of this stuff, just because, you know, we want our stuff to last and we want to be known for quality and stuff like that. So our kits come with the 3/4 inch melamine like this that has a really good finish. It's tight and it's a lot more dense. It also gives you the weight and stuff that you're looking for. I would say that this plywood, all these pieces here probably weigh 1/4 of what this weighs. So you know, you're looking at density factor too for these small arcades. We're not putting CRTs and stuff so much in our machines and stuff anymore, unless they're a recreation or a remake. Us here, we make them all with LCDs and stuff brand new, so it's a lot easier for us to warranty them, control what's going on in our shop, instead of you know, putting out some new old stock or a used monitor, that type of a thing. So the third and final, the one that we like using the most, is MDF. Now there's a couple different grades of this, but the two major grades of this are regular MDF, and you're looking at the ultralight MDF. Now the ultralight MDF, that will tend to kind of warp over time, bend, that type of a thing. It is made with a lot less glue, a lot less material, that type of a thing, and it's only about, I think it's like 2/3 of the weight is what they say on the per sheet. So it's just kind of not up to snuff for the quality that we like. But the 3/4 inch MDF, this stuff is not going to warp, bend, or anything. It's got an unbelievably good finish on both sides. You get a stellar looking product when using MDF in the end. So we use a lacquer finish and stuff if we're not using the melamine for our kits and stuff. The melamine gives us the finish that you want for the kit, so people don't have to paint, prime, whatever. After you put it together, you're ready to decal it pretty much. This stuff here has to be prepped, sand painted, or primed, painted again, lacquered, and then you have to either clear coat it or put a decal on it or whatever from there. But the durability of the finish on this is amazing. So it'd be like your kitchen cupboards kind of a thing. You know, those last for 30, 40 years kind of thing, or 20, 30 years, depending on who did it, or 10 years, that type of thing, I guess. But we put 3 coats of paint or 3 coats of lacquer on here, and then a clear coat finish when we're done. So we try to give you something that's a really high quality product in our shop. For yourself, if you're doing it on your own, I mean, you can just hand paint this, and you can use like a interior, exterior type of paint, roll it on, do that, whatever. You're still going to get a way better finish on this than you would off of a plywood. Fighting with the plywood, sanding even that good side that they're supposed to come on, like sanding it and doing all that stuff to get rid of that grain is nearly impossible. You're always going to see it, and it's always going to pop out. And it just seems like, you know, it doesn't take 30 years for 20 years for it to pop out now. It seems like it's 2 to 5. I've seen some machines that were made only a couple of years ago out of plywood. They're already starting to come apart. I mean, it could just be the quality of the craftsmanship, I'm not sure, but you know, I'm just strictly talking to its finish that I can tell off of that. So in the end, the MDF is going to be the heaviest out of all these. So if you're using something like an LCD, that type of thing, you still want to have that beef, that girth of an arcade machine and that feel of quality. And this is something that's what's going to do it. So if you have any questions or concerns about what type of wood and stuff you use when you're building an arcade, or when you're buying an arcade, what type of materials you're looking for to have it built in when you're asking questions about the arcade that you're buying, you know, definitely if it's not something that's 20, 30 years old, if it's something that's a little bit newer, you're going to want to have some sort of new material to it. The last thing that I want to point out about any of this wood is a lot of people have a myth or concern about water, humidity, that type of a thing, where these woods swell and that type of a thing. Even plywood will swell and do its thing when it gets wet and submerged in water. Now, MDF, if it's painted, primed, and sealed properly, you could almost dip it in water and it would be fine. But I mean, I wouldn't want to test that theory too much, but especially on a finished cabinet. But it's not going to attract and absorb humidity from the air. I mean, if it's sitting in the basement and it goes through a flood, damage is damage. Whether it's going to be to an MDF particle board or a piece of plywood, I'm not sure what anybody's thinking. We're going, oh, MDF is crap that way. I mean, water is water is water. It's going to give you damage, and it's going to soak into the wood, and it's going to turn into mold, or it's going to expand or do whatever. It's just particle board would probably be the worst if you're going to dip it into water, but it's going to give you the best, most durable finish on the outside when it stays dry, that type of a thing. MDF needs a little bit of work, but if you do the work properly, the quality that you can get out of it is amazing. Plywood itself, feel free to do whatever you want. Use whatever kind of wood you want. We refuse to use plywood in our shop just because of that bend and that warping and stuff that occurs. It's almost impossible to get something squared up when you're building with plywood unless you're squeezing it the whole time and you're fighting with it to get it square. Yeah, you can get it square when you do that and you're screwing it and getting it all good to go, but you have to remember that that pressure is always there, so it's always fighting itself to come out of square. Even though you clamped it and did all those things, it's that pressure on that wood is staying that way forever. It's not going to just relax and just be like, okay, thanks for putting me in this spot. You know, where MDF will. This stuff, especially if you dado it and things like that, we do that with the CNC, and that's probably for another day. But I just wanted to go over the reasons why people use what they use for certain types of wood and stuff. Especially a lot of the things that I'm talking about right now are going to have to do with like coastal regions or Canada, where there's a lot of humidity and things like that. That's where a lot of this stuff goes or comes from. So hopefully I debunked a couple myths for you. Maybe I brought up a couple other concerns or questions that you might have. Feel free to ask away underneath this video, and we'll get back to you as soon as we can. I'm usually on there online a couple of times a day to check these messages. So if you have them, feel free, and hope to see you soon.